Hey guys, welcome back. This is the MMA Breakdown doing predictions today for UFC Fight Night 66, Edgar versus Faber. This is the fight card in Manila and good main event, although I'd rather see Edgar fighting another top contender. Faber to me has been on a big decline, and I'll go more in depth with that when we cover the main event. But the rest of the card, not real good. A lot of the Asian fighters who only seem to fight on the cards in Asia. A lot of guys from the Tough China card and the last Macau card last August. And I hope I don't sound offensive saying this, but a lot of these Asian fighters, they've just been a blur in my mind. None of them really resonate with me, and I don't know if that's just because of their fighting style or that none of them are very good, but it's hard for me to remember a lot of these guys. They're not registering very well in my memory, but I have seen all of their fights if they've fought in the UFC, but we'll try to run through this pretty quickly here. So starting off with the UFC Fight Pass preliminary card at flyweight, Nolan Ticman versus Zhikui. Nolan Ticman fought Frankie Saenz in his debut. That was back in the main card last August, and I didn't catch most of that fight. It was a Fox Sports 2 prelim. I had to catch a stream online, and I was only able to see about the last round of that fight. And so didn't see much of it, but Saenz was winning that fight. I thought he was looking clearly better than Ticman, but I didn't think Ticman looked outclassed or looked like he didn't belong there. He was getting some of his shots in too, but mostly had his back to the fence, and Saenz was working some good clinch striking and elbows against the fence, things like that. And Zhikui, this is one of the fighters that I had no idea who he was looking over this card before making this video. But when I looked up his record, I immediately remembered his fight against Royston Wee, because I thought that was one of the worst robberies that I've ever seen in the UFC. And it was kind of surprising to me. It didn't seem that many other people felt that way, but I thought he completely dominated Royston Wee in their fight. Had his back a lot, was pounding on him, had him hurt, really put a beating on him. Royston Wee was maybe able to take his back for a couple of seconds here and there throughout the fight, but I thought it was complete domination, and Royston Wee got the decision. So that's what I remember of Zhikui. But other than that, I have to go with Nolan Ticman here. Royston Wee, not a high-level fighter. And if Zhikui wasn't able to put him away, even though he was being really dominant throughout the fight, I have to assume he's not a very high-level fighter either. So I'm going to go with Ticman here. And moving on, another flyweight fight on the Fight Pass prelim card, rolled in Sangcha-An versus Delos Reyes. Sangcha-An fought Richie Vasilic in his debut. Got out-wrestled. Seems to have a real traditional style of... traditional martial arts striking style, a lot of spinning kicks and things like that. And Vasilic, from what I remember, was just able to take him down over and over again. Delos Reyes fought Dustin Kimura in his debut, dropped him right out of the gate. I was trying to put him away, but got submitted, trying to follow up on the knockdown. And then his last fight against the guy who just fought Demetrius Johnson, Kyoji Horiguchi, got knocked out early himself. Was not a competitive fight. I have to go with Delos Reyes here. He's gotten a win already. I'm sorry, he hasn't gotten a win, but had the knockdown against Kimura, which is just better than Sangcha-An's effort against Richie Vasilic, who I don't think is really a high-level flyweight, so I'm going to go with Delos Reyes here. Next up, moving on to the Fox Sports 1 preliminary card at bantamweight, Guang Yu versus Royston Wee. Guang Yu is the featherweight winner of Tough China. Fought Jianping Yang here. I don't remember that fight too well. I think a lot of people were saying that both those guys looked terrible in that fight, and I remember thinking that Guang Yu didn't look too bad. For Tough China, that caliber of fighter, I think he looked okay. And then Royson Wee, already talked about his last fight against Zhikui, that I thought he just clearly lost, got completely beat up on and dominated. But in his debut, got a decision win over Dave Galera. Was just able to out-wrestle him, but once he got the fight to the ground, wasn't able to do anything effective with his wrestling. Didn't threaten with any submissions and wasn't dangerous with his ground and pound at all. So I'm going to go with Guang Yu here. I think Royson Wee just, if you watch that last fight against Zhikui, how badly he was getting beaten up, I think, his ceiling has been revealed right there. So I'm going to go with Guang Yu, but, I don't know if these guys, we haven't seen much of them and don't really know their true talent level, but I'll go with Guang Yu. Next up at welterweight, Li Jingliang versus Diego Lima. Jingliang had a decision win over David Machado in his debut. I don't think he looked good. I think both those guys were really low-level fighters pitted against each other. Was able to out-strike Machado on the feet, though. Out-jabbed him, but Machado was able to get a few takedowns on him, and really anytime he shot in was able to get the takedown and seemed to not pursue that. I think if he had been fighting a more intelligent fighter, he would have just been out-wrestled all day. And Nordin Taleb in his last fight was able to outstrike him on the feet and I think take him down a few times, and didn't look good in that fight at all. Got dominated pretty clearly. And then Diego Lima, it's kind of sad for me to see this guy, he got finished in 2 of his 3 fights after the show, when in the house he was the only guy who looked like he had any potential, and I think was the only guy, one of only 2 guys in the house, I think, to get a finish, and he had 2 finishes, 2 submission wins in the house, but getting knocked out by Eddie Gordon in the finale, and then very similarly getting steamrolled by Tim Means very early in his last fight. Did not look good. Against Jorge de Oliveira, he was able to use his wrestling and grappling to pitch a shutout and get a decision win there. But I think it's pretty clear he just doesn't have the chin, doesn't have the striking defense to hang in the UFC, even at a lower level. But here I will take Lima to win. Jingliang hasn't shown any power in his 2 UFC fights, so I don't think he'll challenge Lima there. And I think Lima's going to be able to impose his grappling and wrestling game on Jingliang, so I'm going to go with Lima here. Next up, a lightweight, Zhang Lipeng versus Cajun Johnson. Lipeng was the Tough China winner at lightweight, beat Wang Sai in the finale, and beat Brendan O'Reilly in his last fight. And both performances very similar. Out-wrestled both guys, really dominated them on the ground, always pursues the takedown. Pretty scrappy fighter, actually, and I think most people were taking Brendan O'Reilly to beat him in the last fight just because Lipeng was from Tough China, and all of these guys kind of have a stigma of being very low-level fighters, but you can't do that for any of these guys. If you're making picks or betting or whatever, don't pick against them just because they're Asian MMA fighters. Judge them based on what you've seen of them. But Wang Sai and Lipeng both had very dominant wins in their last fights, fighting against non-Asian fighters. Lipeng getting a dominant win over O'Reilly and Wing Sai, wrecking Danny Mitchell in his last fight. So just goes to show that even if these guys don't have a really extensive background in MMA, I think they're really hungry and fight hard. But anyway, Lipeng seems to be a really grappling-based fighter. And Cajun Johnson from Tough Nations, I liked his win. I think it was the first fight in the house that season. I think it was Brendan O'Reilly that he beat, attacked with a knee bar that he was close to getting, and I think finished him off with a rear naked choke. And then got knocked out brutally by the winner, Chad Laprise, in his next fight. And then in the UFC, fought Tai Hyun Bang, and got knocked out pretty devastatingly again. So I think he also has his chin is pretty suspect and probably can't hold up in the UFC. 2 brutal knockouts. I'm going to take Zhang Lipeng here, though. Cajun Johnson in that fight against Tai Hyun Bang just didn't look that comfortable on the feet. Didn't seem like he had a lot of tools he could go to. And Lipeng with his very persistent wrestling game, I think that'll be enough here to get the win. So taking Lipeng. Moving on, lightweight fight, last prelim fight, Tai Hyun Bang versus John Tuck. And Tai Hyun Bang just talked about his knockout over Cajun Johnson in his last fight. Another one of these guys, kind of like Katsunori Kakuno, has the traditional martial arts stance and striking style. In his debut, fought Mirabek Taisumov. Didn't look good. Kind of lost that fight clearly, but didn't get brutally knocked out like Taisumov did to his next 2 opponents. So, I don't know how much that counts for, but I'm not picking Bang to win this fight. John Tuck, had a nice win over Jake Lindsay a couple fights ago where he got the finish. His striking, I think, looked improved from his previous fight against Norman Park. He was able to outstrike Lindsay on the feet. He took him down and finished him with those heel kicks to the body from back control. So that was kind of impressive. Seems like a kind of crafty guy on the ground and on the feet. Decent, okay striking and decent grappling. Got out wrestled though pretty badly by Kevin Lee in his last fight and outboxed on the feet. Couldn't match Lee's pace or aggression. His loss to Norman Park I thought was pretty bad. Just couldn't get anything going on the feet and just stood in front of Park. Ate a lot of his shots, and then his debut against Zhang Taekwon, got the decision there. I think that was a back and forth fight, some scrambles in there. John Tuck, I just think he's kind of a low level guy though, without not a very high ceiling. But I'm gonna pick John Tuck to win this fight. I don't trust that traditional martial arts striking style that Bang seems to have. I think he will have a power advantage here, though, but Tuck seems like a crafty enough grappler and striker and transitions pretty well between the two, so I'm going to take Tuck here. Moving on to the main card, 6-fight main card at featherweight, Mark Ediva versus Levon Makashvili. Makashvili, a newcomer, I don't know him. Mark Ediva, he beat Jumabayek Terzin in his debut. A pretty uneventful fight. Didn't look good. It was the whole fight was contested on the feet, and Ediva didn't look too dominant, didn't throw that high a volume. And then his last fight against Kevin Souza got finished. Just got overwhelmed by the volume and striking by Souza. So I don't think Mark Ediva has a lot of potential, but I'm not going to make a pick here, so we're going to move on. Featherweight, Felipe Nover versus Yui Chul Nam. Yui Chul Nam got a win over Kazuki Tokudome in his last fight, and that was his debut, but that's one of the fights that I just don't remember at all. So I can't give any analysis on him. And Felipe Nover making his return, had a brief stint in the UFC after Tough, and looks like he lost all 3 fights in the UFC. And I can't comment on his career either, so I'm not going to make a pick here either. Moving on, at welterweight, Guang Lim versus Neil Magny. This is an interesting fight. Neil Magny's been on a big roll. I think it's possible that Lim could be his biggest test this far, but Neil Magny, I do think, is the more skilled and more well-rounded fighter. Guang Lim's just looked like a bruiser, a big, strong guy for the weight class with a lot of power. Has finished all 3 of his wins. Has only lost to Tarek Safadine, and that fight went 5 rounds. Even with Lim's leg completely beaten up, eating a ton of leg kicks throughout the fight, he was able to take it the distance and mounted a little comeback late, where I think he might have wobbled Safadine late in the fight, but finished Pascal Kraus with a flying knee and knocked out Marcelo Guamarães and Takanori Sato in his last fight. Really low-level guys, really just the bottom feeders in the UFC. But that size and power, I think, could give Magny some problems here. Magny on a 6-fight win streak, although his win 3 fights ago against Alex Garcia, I think that easily could have gone Garcia's way. A very razor-thin decision win there. Starting to put the finishing ability together, though. Finished Kunimoto in his last fight with a rear naked choke. Came in the 3rd round, so not that great. Finished William Macario before that, also in the 3rd round. And then the fight where I thought he kind of turned the corner was against Rodrigo de Lima. Was getting dominated in the 1st round, got put on the ground, was stuck in a triangle for the whole round, and then came out in the 2nd round and knocked him out. Also had decision wins over Tim Means and Ghasanu Malatov before that. But Neil Magny, striking not that lethal or dominant, really likes to clinch up and tie you up, drag you down to the ground. Try to do that against Garcia, and was able to get Kunimoto to the ground that way. I think he can win here, just a more well-rounded fighter, but Guang Lim, I think, can test him on the feet with the power, and technically might not be as sharp as Magny on the feet, but I think aggression and power, he might have the edge there, but I'm going to take Magny to win the decision. Next up in middleweight, Mark Munoz versus Luke Barnatt. This is really a horrible fight. Munoz, I think, just needs to retire, really, and I think he's already announced his retirement, I think, right? Yeah, said that this is going to be his last fight. But just what a decline for this guy. After the loss to Weidman, that brutal knockout loss, getting hit with that elbow, came back, had the nice win over Tim Boetsch, where, he still looked pretty decent. Looked like he might be able to hang around for a bit. But then lost his last 3 fights, getting finished in all of them. Got blown through by Machida, and then Mousasi was able to stuff all of his takedowns, reverse his takedown attempts, and choked him out in the 1st round. And then losing even more quickly to Johan Carneiro in his last fight. I think shot in for a takedown, and it got stuffed, very similar to what was going on against Mousasi, and got choked out there, just looking very old and shop-worn. And then Luke Barnatt, this is a guy I was really high on, not from what he did in the show, but coming in and beating Andrew Craig, knocking him down and finishing him in his first fight after Tough. And then I thought he looked good in his win over Mats Nilsson, showed a better jab and then finished him off with a head kick. And then lost decision to Sean Strickland. And then against Roger Narvaez, I had no idea what happened. I thought Barnatt just looked terrible. Couldn't find his rhythm on the feet at all. Just looked kind of disinterested. And then Narvaez, I think it was a head kick he nailed him with, maybe a punch, but he dropped him in that third round. And Narvaez wasn't good enough to put him away, but took his back, tried to choke him out, and I thought Barnatt just looked like a completely diminished fighter in that last fight than what we've seen of him before. So two guys who I think are coming off of really bad performances. Munoz, a much greater decline over his last several fights than Barnett, but I don't really know who to take here. I think Munoz, obviously, his wrestling was never good enough where he could out-wrestle the elite guys in the division, like Okami, had some success against Maya, but I think he could out-wrestle Barnett here. I mean, he could out-wrestle guys like Boch and Maya, but I think he has the wrestling advantage here, but I just don't trust his chin, and I don't trust just his athleticism and his mobility in this fight. I mean, if he's getting his back taken off of a takedown attempt and choked out by Juan Carnero, I think Luke Barnett still young enough to where he can have a big speed advantage and test that chin. So I just don't trust Munoz to put it together even against a low-level guy like Barnett, who's not that low-level, but not anywhere close to the top 10. So I think I have to go with Barnett, but he didn't look good at all in his last fight, and I think Munoz has a chance to win a decision here, but I'm going to go with Barnett. All right, co-main event, middleweight Gegard Mousasi versus Costas Philippou. I kind of wish Mousasi would be fighting a higher level guy here. But Philippou coming off of a big win over Lorenz Larkin, even though that was a year ago at this point. And Mousasi coming off of the win over Dan Henderson, where he got the finish. Everyone complained that was an early stoppage. I didn't really feel that way. I mean, it could have gone on, but I thought Henderson was pretty much done. I think Mousasi, we've seen that he's not going to be able to beat the elite guys, just not skilled enough everywhere. Souza was able to outstrike him, pressure him on the feet, blitz him, and then on the ground, finish him off with a great guillotine choke. But against Mark Munoz, he was able to get the finish, had real good pressure, was just able to walk him back into the fence, pick him apart, and then finish him off on the ground. Even against Lyoto Machida, I thought he showed good forward pressure, just wasn't able to really pull the trigger enough in that fight. And then against Henderson, showed he's still has some power and put him out pretty easily. I think he's going to be able to get the win here against Philippou. Both these guys are notorious, at least to me, for having pretty bad takedown defense. I remember the fight in Strikeforce where Jardine was just taking him down over and over again, even though Jardine was badly hurt and just getting beaten up on the feet throughout that fight. And then Costas Philippou just got taken down all day by Francis Carmont, couldn't do anything to get up off of his back. Philippou, I think, will have the power advantage on the feet, but Mousasi, I think, just a more diverse striker, have more fluid movement on the feet. Philippou's a bit of a power striker, throws big haymakers and looks a bit stiff. And then on the ground, I think Mousasi will have the grappling advantage. We really haven't seen much of Philippou's ground game at all. I think the last time was several years ago when he fought Jorge Rivera. Was on the ground briefly, I think, attempted an omoplata, but I think Mousasi's just more highly skilled really everywhere in this fight. Philippou will just have the power advantage, and that's it. All right, now the main event, featherweight Frankie Edgar versus Uriah Faber. I think Edgar's really going to steamroll Faber here. Faber, I've mentioned this several times throughout his last couple of fights, but his 2013, his calendar year, it was a great year for him. A very busy year, fought 5 times, I think, 4 times, and it culminated with a win over Michael McDonald, who I saw as one of these new breed guys, young prospects coming up. I thought he was going to beat Faber in that fight. And Faber looked, I think, the best he ever had, maybe the best he's looked in his whole career. Was able to hurt McDonald on the feet, just completely ran through him and finished him off with the submission. And then fought Hayden Barao on it was like 6 weeks' notice or something. And I just thought it was a terrible decision, and that was really the beginning of the end for Faber. Took that fight after a very busy year. I don't think he recovered, and I don't think he had any time to game plan, and really kind of showed in that fight. Just got dropped early and finished, early stoppage and whatever, but still. And then his next 2 fights, you saw immediately, a drop-off in his performance. Immediately his next fight against Alex Caceres, couldn't get anything going on the feet, was really stifled, was eating shots from Caceres, couldn't take him down, and until the 3rd round, he just kind of went for broke, just kind of bum rushed his way into a takedown and finished him off on the ground. And that's a good skill to have, being able to just will your way to the finish like that. He did the same thing to Scott Jorgensen earlier in his winning streak the previous year. But I think really saw in that fight that he was really starting to diminish just athletically and skill-wise as well. And then Francisco Rivera in his last fight, I thought Edgar was well on his way to losing a decision in that fight if it wasn't for the eye poke. It's not like he was getting beaten up badly, but same thing. All of his takedown attempts were stuffed. He was eating kicks and knees from Rivera off of his takedown attempts, and on the feet couldn't get anything going. Faber, I think, maybe his striking is kind of taken a step down over the years. I remember his win over Brian Bowles, hurt him on the feet. His fight against Eddie Wineland, his first fight in the UFC, his striking was looking pretty fluid, and now it's just winging haymakers, throwing from the hip, stuff like that. Even against McDonald, I thought his timing was really good, but it's just throwing bombs. They were well timed, but it's really shown in his last 2 fights against Caceres and Rivera. His striking has just not been on point. And he can't fall back on his wrestling because that hasn't been working either. Might just be him getting up there in age, not as athletic as he used to be. But I think he's on a clear decline. Frankie Edgar, Faber's decline coupled with, in my mind, Edgar's rise, looking the best he's ever looked in his last fight against Cub Swanson. Since dropping down to featherweight, I didn't think Faber was looking all that great. His fight against Charles Oliveira was not that dominant. And then the fight against Penn, they sidelined him for a year to do the show, and then got the finish against Penn, which I didn't quite expect, but I thought he would dominate Penn. I didn't really count that for too much in my mind, beating Penn. But the fight against Swanson, who was on this big win streak, also a really dangerous fighter, a lot of finishes, completely dominated him. And I know a lot of the fans probably don't like Edgar's style, but I don't know how you can't appreciate that. I didn't think it was boring at all. Pitched a shutout against a really dynamic and dangerous striker like Swanson, and capitalized at the last second to get the finish. His wrestling had never been that dominant in a fight before at lightweight. Even his knockout win over Maynard, that fight came on the feet. That win came on the feet. he was always been a good wrestler, but was just never that dominant. We could just take guys down repeatedly and pound away from top position. So I thought that was really kind of a transcendence for Edgar, elevating himself to a higher level, at least at featherweight or ever. Like I said, I think that was the most dominant he'd ever looked. So I have to go with Edgar here. I just think he's going to have the wrestling advantage. I think his striking is way more technical than Faber's. Faber, I think, can have a power advantage, and Edgar, his chin has been tested a few times. Obviously against Maynard at lightweight in both of those fights. He can be hittable at times. Ben Henderson was able to hit him a lot too, but I just seen him being the better athlete at this point, more skilled striker and a more effective wrestler. The only area where I think Faber could have an advantage is the scrambles. Faber has really great submissions, obviously the guillotine choke, and it's good at taking the back. But again, his wrestling hasn't really been there, and I don't know if he can put himself in those positions, but if he can scramble off of Edgar's takedown attempts, I think there could be an opening there for him. But I just see Edgar cruising to a very dominant decision in this fight. So got to go with Edgar all the way. All right, guys, those are my predictions for UFC Fight Night 66, Edgar versus Faber. Thank you very much for watching. Please like the video, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back next week. I'll be back next week with my predictions for UFC 187, Johnson versus Cormier, and actually beginning with this card, Edgar versus Faber. I'm planning to do a recap, and hopefully throughout the summer I'll be doing recaps for hopefully all of the UFC events, and it's going to be a very busy summer for UFC. But that's the plan. Thank you guys. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye.